press conference, and we got together a lot of healthcare experts from around the state, including the gentleman on the far left is Dr. Dan Ron, the chancellor of UAMS. Dr. Rick Smith, the former dean of the College of Medicine and addiction expert, was there and spoke out against this. I was there, a number of other physicians were there, but healthcare leaders who have a lot of information and knowledge about marijuana spoke out against it at that time. Next slide. Actually, hey Luke, don't play this. We're going to just go to the next, because that'll take too long. So one of the headlines that came out of that was that we said marijuana is not medicine. And then, of course, my Twitter feed erupted with people who said I was mistaken, and said, actually, Dr. Bledsoe, it is medicine. It can be helpful for all these different things. And so I said, well, listen, we need to talk about defining our terms here. What am I saying when I'm saying it's not medicine? What I'm saying is this, is that the plant marijuana is not medicine. But there are over 400 compounds in the marijuana plant. And I do believe that a couple of those compounds, a little bit of THC and CBD, which is another compound, potentially have some medicinal value. But that's very different than handing out the plant. So what we should be doing is, and I use this illustration, we should be doing the same thing we did with the cinchona tree to fight malaria with quinine. So this picture over here, this bark, is bark from the cinchona tree, which is found in Peru. It was discovered over 400 something years ago by native healers that were in Peru. They found that if you mix this bark with tea, or not with tea, with any sort of hot water, that what comes out of that seems to help fevers. So some enterprising scientists, they took the bark of the cinchona tree, they isolated the compounds in the bark and purified it, they dosed it appropriately, and they found that it's a great compound to fight malaria. And the drug quinine came directly from that research. Quinine is still one of the best drugs that we have for malaria, and that's what we should be doing with marijuana. We should be isolating the compounds in marijuana, squeezing the medicinal value out of that plant, but not handing out the plant. We don't have doctors walking around handing out tree bark. Okay? We use the compounds in the tree bark, and that's how we should get it done. Next slide. And this is happening. So these are just three of the drugs that have come from marijuana. The one on the left is Marinol, that's been FDA approved for years now in the United States. The other two, Sativex and Epidiolex, are two drugs that are developed by GW Pharmaceuticals out of Britain, and both of those drugs will be available on the American market soon. The Sativex is already available in Europe. Next slide. But that's in contrast to this, which is non-pharmaceutical grade marijuana that you find in joints or in the edible products. It's not FDA approved. There's no robust data on the safety or the efficacy. The efficacy is, does it actually help people? They're saying, well, all these illnesses are solved. Does it actually do what they're saying? And there's a wide variation in the concentrations and the proportions of the various chemicals, the cannabinoids, the compounds in it. Next slide. So we've already talked about this, the two major cannabinoids, cannabidiol and then delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is THC, that causes the high. Next slide. And the important thing that you need to know about that is in the 60s and 70s, the joints had very low THC. THC is the compound in marijuana that makes you high. Very low THC, and that's the red line. And then this blue line is CBD. Now CBD is the compound that people think might have some potential with helping with pediatric seizures. The content in both these was very low back in the 60s and 70s, which is over here on the left. And the reason that's important is CBD actually modifies THC and keeps you from getting it helps with making it kind of a very manageable high, a slow burn, so to speak. So it works antagonistically against THC. But as the years have gone on, this chart goes up to 2011, you can see that the THC content has risen significantly. And in this it says it's 11 or 12%, almost 12% THC now. Hit the slide, please. In Colorado, I talked to a clinical toxicologist who sent me this slide. The average product is no longer 2 to 4% THC. The average product in Colorado is 23.7% THC with the same CBD level, and in some strains up to 36%. So we're talking about something that's almost a completely different drug, and there's been no research done on how these high THC content things like joints and edibles affect large populations when they're taken habitually. Next slide. All right, so let's look at the research. We're going to burn through this real quickly. These are some of the things that the marijuana crowd says are helped by marijuana. Next slide. So glaucoma is the first thing. Glaucoma is a disease that increases the pressure in your eyeballs and can cause blindness. So, there's not ophthalmologists that are lining up protesting because they can't prescribe marijuana. And the reason is, look at this last quote. This is directly out of the New England Journal of Medicine. Other standard treatments are currently more effective. So if you're an ophthalmologist and you've got a patient with glaucoma and you want them to get better, you've got all these medications that work well, and then you've got marijuana that may or may not help a little bit, but it's far inferior to these other drugs. Next slide. What about AIDS-associated anorexia or wasting syndrome? This is a big one that comes up. This is another one from the Cochrane Library, a very reputable research journal. Evidence for the efficacy, and efficacy is, again, just a big fancy medical term for does it do what it says it does? Evidence for the efficacy and safety of cannabis or marijuana and cannabinoids in this setting is lacking. So not a lot of evidence that this helps. Next slide. What about PTSD? This is another big one. You hear this all the time in the lay press. We've got to pass this because our veterans need it. And the fact of the matter is that we should be taking care of our veterans. I don't think there's anyone who would argue that point. But does it help? Does it help our veterans? Look at this. This is a study of over 2,000 veterans, and they tracked them for those that had PTSD and compared those that were using marijuana and those that weren't. In this observational study, initiating marijuana use after treatment was associated with worse PTSD symptoms, more violent behavior, and alcohol use. Not only does it not help, it makes it worse. If you've got PTSD, it is malpractice for me as a physician to give you marijuana because I'm going to make you worse. That's not talked about in the lay press. Next slide, please. Okay, what about pediatric seizures? Now, I think there is some potential here. I talked to the head of pediatric neurology, who's over here at Children's Hospital. He's done some of this research. He said there is a very, very small sliver of pediatric patients that may benefit from CBD, but that's not smoking marijuana. That's a compound out of the marijuana plant, and that needs to be purified and make sure there's no pesticide in it, there's no contaminants in it, and if we're going to be giving this to children, we want to make sure it's safe. So there could potentially be a little bit of benefit from it, but not nearly the benefit that's been told. And this Cochrane research group, very respected journal, looked at all the big research studies, and at the end of it, they said no reliable conclusions can be drawn at present regarding the efficacy of cannabinoids as a treatment for epilepsy. Next slide. So the CBD component is something that I think is an important discussion to have. We've already talked about it, but I just want to point this out. All these green states are states that have passed laws just to make CBD more available. And there's a state representative in town just this week that called me and said he's going to be submitting one of these bills in the spring session. So that might be something that we can look at. I haven't looked at the bill, so I don't know if I'm for it or against it, but certainly that's much better and a much more reasonable way of attacking this problem than giving out a plant that you're not going to give to a child anyway to smoke. Okay, next slide. So the other issue is pain. If you look at why people are getting medical marijuana cards in other states, this is Colorado. Cachexia, which is just basically, they're wasting away because they're not eating, is only 1%. Now these numbers don't add up to 100% because some patients have more than one symptom, but cachexia is 1%, glaucoma 1%, HIV/AIDS 1%. So that's only 3% right there. Seizures 2%, cancer 3%. I mean, minuscule numbers, folks. Severe nausea 10%. Muscle spasms 15%, pain 93%. All right, next slide. And anytime we're going to talk about pain, we're going to talk about opioids. So this is a cartoon. My kids think I'm famous because I made a cartoon, political cartoon in the Arkansas Times. So let's just read this right here. So you have this gentleman here holding up a marijuana plant, and the cartoon says, Arkansas Surgeon General on medical marijuana. Sir, this plant can help relieve pain, nausea, and PTSD for the chronically ill. And I'm holding a big bottle of OxyContin, and I say, it's not safe. A chronically ill patriot knows we need to support our opioid. Now they misspelled opioid, but opioid corporations. And by the way, you're under arrest. So, obviously not where I stand on opioids. Next slide.